Hey class, Mr. Durst here, and we're going to talk about heart anatomy in this lab recording. So here's our lab objective sheet. We're looking at exercise 26 content, and we're just going to start. I'm going to skip ahead actually and go to the heart histology right here, and I'm going to talk you through this, and then we'll start talking about more of the gross anatomy. So as we're looking at heart muscle tissue, you can see some right here on our histology guide website that I hyperlinked for you. And as we're looking at heart muscle tissue, it's characterized in this longitudinal section by cells which are branching and interconnected with each other. And if we zoom in really closely, you can see within these individual cells that there's a very mild striation forming. If I go to the digital histology site, just to show you the same thing, but from a different photomicrograph. This is another very representative view. So you can see how there's branching of the cells. And I'll admit, I struggle with seeing the mild striations, but you can probably see as you look at this. Give me a second here. Let's go with green. You can probably see some darker lines right there. I drew an arrow pointing to some. I'll draw an arrow right over here pointing to some more. Those darker lines are referred to as intercalated discs. And I just hit the little arrow, the label right there to have the yellow arrows appear next to the intercalated discs. Here within our histology guide photomicrograph, you can see some intercalated discs as well. For instance, there's one right there next to the tip of that arrow, but it's not quite as nice as the digital histology site that I just showed you. Let's go back to our lab objective sheet. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. I showed you heart muscle tissue and intercalated disc, but I skipped cardiomyocyte. For those of you who like root words, cardio means heart, myo means muscle, cyte means cell. Cardiomyocyte literally means a heart muscle cell. So as we're looking at this photomicrograph, we can see individual cardiomyocytes. And individual cardiomyocytes start and end at the intercalated disc. And because it's difficult to see these intercalated discs, I can have one right there at the tip of my pointer. Because it's so hard to see them in this photomicrograph, I'm going to skip back to digital histology so that I'm going to emphasize for you those individual heart muscle cells. Let's just go to the main slide right there. And I'll pull up and trace a heart muscle cell for you. So we have an intercalated disc here at one end, an intercalated disc right here, and right here. And then boom, boom, boom. So as we're looking at this cardiomyocyte that I just traced in green, the intercalated discs mark the ends of it. And as we're looking at the nuclei within a cardiomyocyte, most of the time they're going to be mononucleate or one nucleated cells. Every once in a while, you'll find a binucleate or two nuclei within a single cardiomyocyte. The key thing I want you to focus on, though, for cardiomyocytes is the intercalated discs and the branching patterns. And as we advance through the digital histology, you can have different views of the exact same thing. And I want to encourage you on your own time to work through this histology in more detail. Let's move on to layers of the heart. Epi means towards the surface, myo means muscle, endo means in, and then cardi refers to the heart. So as we're looking at these layers of the heart, I'm going to go right over here and within Anatomy Atlas, a visible body. I just clicked on one of the pre-made views, and I don't want to see any lungs, so I'm going to go ahead and just remove all of the pulmonary systems, or respiratory system, and then I can see my heart right there. And I'll admit, these pulmonary veins are kind of a pain in the butt, so I'm just going to get rid of all pulmonary circulation in general, just to really clean it up for us. There we go. This is a nice looking heart right here. Kind of a happy heart. Just hanging out in black void. And any surface layer of the heart is going to be referred to as the epicardium. And I hid that. I just hit the H button. So now you can see how I have that epicardium highlighted. And yes, right here, visible body calls it the diaphragmatic surface. Visible body in this instance is going into too much detail. You don't need to know it in that much detail. We have epicardium on the outside. Endocardium is the inner layer of the heart. And then in between, we have this thick muscular layer. This is the myocardium. And I really want to emphasize for you the differences in thickness of the myocardium. The myocardium is going to be really thick on one side and then thinner on the other. And this is important for determining left versus right. Here we have the left ventricle. And the myocardium associated with the left ventricle is always going to be thicker than over here. We have the right ventricle, and the myocardium of the right ventricle is always going to be thinner. Well, and that's an important detail for determining left versus right when looking at these parts or chambers of the heart. Let's go back to our lab objective sheet. As we look at the chambers of the heart, we have ventricles and atrium. The ventricles are the inferior chambers of the heart. We have the left ventricle and the right ventricle. The atria are the superior or superior chambers of the heart. Ooh, I did not want to do that one. Let me hit the back button. That was a little bit too much for me right there. Let's back up here. So we're looking at the blood vessels. I just got to get rid of these blood vessels. They are too much for me. They're too cluttered. There we go. So here we can see on the right side of the heart, this chamber, this overall chamber, is referred to as the right atrium. And as I look at the right atrium, there's a portion of it right here that's going to be rather anterior located, and there's this little lip that hangs over the edge. I'm tracing it right now in green. That portion is referred to as the auricle. It's supposed to look like a little mini ear flap. Auricle is a word that refers to the outer ear. So we have the right atrium and the right auricle, which is an extension of the right atrium. And over here on this left side, we have the left atrium, and then this flap hanging right here is going to be the left auricle that I've just traced right there for you. Let's clear that drawing. Now, when we're looking at the valves of the heart, particularly with the valves of the heart, there are too many names out there. There's mitral valves, there's semilunar valves, there's bicuspid and tricuspid, and Ms. Laundrich, I really don't want you to get bogged down with all this redundant terminology. Stick to only what we have on the lab objective sheet, please, for your own sanity. We have the left atrioventricular valve and these right atrioventricular valve. And as the name implies, these valves are between the atria and the ventricles for atrioventricular. Then we have an aortic valve and a pulmonary valve. And these valves are going to lead to the major blood vessels, the aorta and the pulmonary trunk. So let's go back to visible body. Here with it, we have our heart kind of floating in the black void. And I can go ahead and click right here and just remove some of the muscular layers to expose our valves. So here we have a valve that has a parachute-like appearance. This valve that's on the right side is the right atrioventricular valve, and then over here on the left side is our left atrioventricular valve. So those are our two valves for that separate the atria from the ventricles. And then we're also going to have some valves associated with, let me back up here to add our fleshy layers, associated with the different chambers. So right here we have the left ventricle, and if I'm looking in the left ventricle, if I tilt back within the left ventricle, you can see how there's this valve right here that has 1, 2, 3 cusps. That is the aortic valve. And that aortic valve is associated with the left ventricle, leads directly to the ascending aorta. Within the right ventricle, if I tilt back here, we can see connected to it these three cusps, and those form the pulmonary valve that leads to the pulmonary trunk that then goes to the pulmonary arteries, carrying blood away from the heart. So those are our valves of the heart. Up next we have some external structures. We have the anterior and posterior interventricular sulcus, or sulci for the plural. And I love this. These are beautiful names. We have anterior and posterior, so we know what side of the heart. And because it's a sulcus, it's an shallow indentation. Where's this shallow indentation? It is in between the ventricles, interventricular, in between ventricles. So let's go ahead and show you that. Those two indentations. Right here on the anterior of the heart, we have an indentation right here. I can't click it in Visible Body, so I'm just going to go ahead and highlight it in green for you, or trace it in green. This is the anterior interventricular sulcus, in between our left and right ventricles. And then if I go to back here to our heart, I can flip it around and look at the posterior of the heart. And then down here we have the posterior, and we have a large indentation in between the ventricles. This is the posterior interventricular sulcus. And because this is the posterior, we now have left and right ventricles. We also have some internal structures of the heart. So as we look at these internal structures of the heart, these structures are going to be walls. Septum means wall. We have a wall in between the atria. We have a little wall in between the ventricles. Let's go ahead and highlight those for you. So right here is the interventricular septum, the muscular tissue in between the ventricles. And it's difficult to get to here in Visible Body, but we'll make it happen. Right here, let's go back up a bit here. This surface right here that I'm tracing is a wall of muscular tissue that separates the left and right atria from each other, and that's referred to as the interatrial septum. Within Visible Body, you will not be able to click on that structure. We also have some other structures that you need to know. The papillary muscles, the chordae tendineae, and the moderator band. And I'm going to focus over here at this beautiful right atrioventricular valve. The flaps of the of the atrioventricular valves merge into these cords, and these are referred to as the chordae tendineae. And the chordae tendineae are then going to merge with some muscles referred to as papillary muscles, and these papillary muscles are going to help anchor the chordae tendineae and ultimately keep the flaps of the atrioventricular valves pointing in the correct direction. You can think of these as a parachute and then the parachute cords. There's also another structure that's only present within the right ventricle, and that is the moderator band. And that moderator band helps to keep the right ventricle from overinflating with blood, for overfilling with blood as we look at it. So that's Roman numeral number 1, anatomy of the heart. And this is a good stopping point for our video. If you have any questions or comments about the anatomy of the heart, please feel free to shoot me an email or to post them on the class discussion board. And as always, happy studies.